Today we have a reflection for Wednesday, the 20th of May, 2020. And as we approach the end of this Easter season, being a person who's kind of fixated on numbers, 3s and 7s, I'm almost biblical, as well as 7s and 40s and all these different things, I thought I would do a Trinitarian presentation and thinking of this Easter season. So it'll be Easter, the Ascension, and Pentecost. When we think of Easter, and we think of John's Gospel, that we get sometimes on the second Sunday of Easter, not actually Easter Day, but that occurrence happens technically on Easter evening, the evening that Jesus rose from the dead. And if you can remember, people were locked up, almost like we seem to feel like we are, in the upper room for fear of the Jews. We seem to be doing it for fear of each other and the virus. But anyway, Jesus appears in their midst and says, "Peace be with you." And in John's Gospel, he says, and he breathes on his disciples, his apostles, and says, "Receive the Holy Spirit. As the Father has sent me, so I send you." So he's kind of at least trying to kind of throw them out of that upper room, even though, if you remember the way it reads, Thomas wasn't there, and the next week they were still huddled up there in the room, and they still had the door locked for fear of the outside. But Jesus is basically commissioning them. He's sending them out. But, they were still kind of doubtful about what was going on. But little by little, depending on which gospel you read, there were appearances of Jesus where he encountered his apostles and disciples. And then we come up with the Ascension. And from the Acts of the Apostles, the thing I love about that is in the reading for, again, Ascension Thursday, which we sometimes have an Ascension Thursday, which would be tomorrow, or on Sunday if it's been moved to the weekend. The line I love is when the man in white or the angel appears and says to the apostles after Jesus is ascended, "O men of Galilee, why are you looking up?" And it's kind of like, hey guys, the party's over. Now Jesus has left you in terms of the body. And so now it's time to start thinking about, what are you going to do? How are you going to carry on the mission? And as Jesus had promised, he's going to send us an advocate, the Holy Spirit. And in John's Gospel, obviously, we get that impression, even though that Jesus might have ascended after 40 days, that the Pentecost, the descent of the Spirit on the apostles, comes as a breath out of Jesus' mouth and happens on Easter night, where, of course, in Luke, we get the impression that the ascension is after 40 days, and then it's another 10 days for the descent of the Holy Spirit upon the apostles as tongues of fire. Whichever way it happened. The important thing is at that point, the wisdom comes to the apostles. The courage comes to the apostles. Think of Peter. Peter, if I had to choose him, would have been my baptismal saint, because I just keep it. Peter's got a temper, at least in the old days. I had a pretty good one too. The other thing, though, is Peter was famous for saying one thing somewhat out of ignorance, and then saying something or doing something completely opposite. If you think of Holy Thursday, you can't wash my feet. Think of Jesus or Peter that night, "I'll never deny you." And then all of a sudden it's, "I don't know him, I don't know him, I don't know him, cock-a-doodle-doo." Think of at least one of the gospel accounts of his meeting Jesus for the first time when he falls to his knees after the miraculous catch of fish. And he falls to Jesus' feet and says, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man." But now with this, Jesus is gone, the Spirit has come, and we watch how Peter, who's somewhat the temperamental, the hot-tempered, he's somewhat the coward, he's somewhat a little bit on the not so intelligent, maybe even dumb side, and yet he knew he was a sinner, and he's gone through this whole conversion experience and goes from being profane to profound, from being a coward to being courageous. And then we get that commission where we're all sent. And I think that those words, even for us, "O men of Galilee, O people of Galilee, O people of Asheville," Why are you looking up? Why are you looking up here, there, and everywhere? Jesus basically has left us not only the Spirit, but his body and blood in the Eucharist. And technically now it's almost becoming time, and maybe it will be almost according to the regulations we've been getting in terms of beginning to relive our lives again after 40 days or maybe 50 if we go all the way to Pentecost, of stepping out, of breathing the air, of maybe receiving in a certain sense the spirit of a new life now that we've been liberated possibly again. Another thing though that's happening on this weekend is this is Memorial Day weekend. And Memorial Day weekend, I can think of all the different Memorial Days I've had from when I was a kid. And if you go back to my time, which is like 60, 70 years ago, when you had a bicycle, you used to put those little playing cards, or sometimes you did it with a balloon on the frame of the bike so that the spokes would hit it and it would sound like a muffler or something like that. And how we used to decorate, you know, because we used to call it Decoration Day as much as we called it Memorial Day. But the solemnness of this thing, because sometimes the festivity, we kind of get lost and forget the solemnness. Because at least in my hometown, we had 3 cemeteries, and the American Legion would go to the cemeteries, and we would walk with the American Legion to the various cemeteries, and you would see the American flags on top of the graves, which could mean that they died in the service of their country during one of the conflicts, or at least during their active military service, or that maybe they died after. But on Memorial Day versus Veterans Day, we remember in a special way those of our country, and maybe we should remember those of other countries that have given their lives, right or wrong, in the service of their country. And so we remember those people. I myself, when I was in the Air Force in Germany, lost my cousin in Vietnam. And I think, as I think of one of my motivations for going into the priesthood and working around the world in the Middle East, was this idea that in honor of my cousin, and a way of honoring all those who have given their lives for the service of their country, those of us who haven't done military service, or maybe that service is over, that we need to start working for more justice and more peace in the world, starting with our families, starting with our parish, starting with our villages and towns, starting with our country, and hopefully that it permeates the world. As I've seen a couple of times, these little tidbits on Facebook, if peace and justice could spread the way this virus has, this world would change for the better, almost as the virus has affected us in somewhat of a negative way. So anyway, hope you had a great Easter. Enjoy the departure of Jesus into the heavens. Enjoy the birthday of the church, which is what Pentecost is, when we are sent out. And have a great and blessed and solemn Memorial Day. God bless.